Let's try to get this video done before my power goes out from all the rain. 2022 was a landmark year for Weiss Schwarz. This was the return of in-person events after the harsh restrictions that we experienced during the pandemic. There were the shop challenges and Bushy Rumble, and while those are valid, there is something different about a regional tournament. This year, there were 4 large-scale events in the world of Bushiroad. There was Bushy Rumble, Springfest Trios, the online WGP, and Bushiroad Championship Series. That's what us international players were able to enter, not just JP players. Now, we are going to talk about some of the best decks in 2022. Most of these decks are JP focused because I'm essentially a JP player. There is some crossover here and there. The 2 games are different, but they're not that different. So with that being said, I will attempt to keep it English focused. D-Side Traumerei. Well, that didn't work out. D-Side Traumerei is a game series that I am almost certain that nobody has played that spawned an anime that I am almost certain nobody has watched. Why is this a set? Well, that is because it's a Bushiroad property, and this was released around the time before Marvel, where we started seeing Bushiroad pushing more of its in-house properties to the game as opposed to grabbing licenses from outside companies. Because this is a Bushiroad property and they're going to try and get their return in their investment, they made this set a little too cracked, especially for a property that no one cared about. This really shined in its level 2 combo. This is on play from hand. You can send your level 3 to the memory and climax combo at the start of your attack phase if you have the climax in play and another knock her up character. Knock her up? I barely know her. Thank you. I'll be here all week. You can swap the 3-2 and this card, then you swap them back at the start of your encore phase. The 3-2 is on play from hand or memory, you heal, and if your memory has 2 or more of the 2-1s, this gains 2k5 power, and on reverse, pay 1, ditch 1, burn 1. And climax combo. On attack, if your memory has 3 or more cards, you can pay 1, ditch 1, burn 4. Now that seems like a lot of damage being thrown around, because it is. I've seen players lose at their level 2 because their opponent had 3 of these bad boys on the field. To gain advantage and recoup some stock, there is the Brainstormer, which is great, and yes, your opponent can't really use an anti-early draw backup because the burn is on attack declaration, and they can't use anti-early draw because they're being swapped back to the 2-1 during the encore step. All you need for a full field is 3 stock. 6 stock and 3 hand in total for 21 points of damage. What? It has seen a lot of play in both Japanese, and I've seen it pop up in my mixed locals as well. It was super good that a lot of players were asking for it to be hit because it's just way too strong, and that is what Bushiroad did. In the final restriction list of 2022, there was an update and D-Side Traumerei was hit with a choice of 3. You do see the stray list floating around with D-Side, but recently the game was actually discontinued and the anime was not renewed for another season, so we could safely say that this is the end of D-Side. Quintessential Quintuplets. Now there's 2 variations of the deck. The JP deck from late in the year and the English deck, which was the JP deck of last year. 2 years ago. The reason there are 2 decks is because the Japanese edition of the game, they were given the movie set in September, and the English received the second set. I'm sure you've encountered the Nino deck while playing this game. You stand by your level 1s and 2s, they get really big, and you're able to keep them on board through their encore effects. Use the event if you feel threatened at any point, and you build up to your 3-2 Nino, where you close out the game. It is really difficult for decks that are not prepared or equipped to take out the 2-2s. It got to the point that anything that gets bigger than the Ninos was called anti-meta. Someone called this card in my Tokyo Revengers deck anti-meta. While I appreciate the sentiment, I'll take the W. So this isn't exactly a waifu deck because you are running some extra cards that can help gain some resources such as the Ichika, but it is really damn close to being a waifu deck, and pure Nino is actually not that bad. In English, it eventually did get hit on the restriction list. That is why this video is a little late, because I wanted to see what the list was. Yeah, this is definitely an image with 2 cards on it. So that is a very quick look at the set 2 Nino build, because when we move over to the Japanese with the movie set, now listen, Bushiroad definitely favors Nino, and it shows. You thought that was good? You ain't seen nothing yet. Now you can choose what to trigger. You want an icy tail for your back row? You got it, Chief. Bushiroad made Nino much more stronger after the movie set, which honestly, they all got really strong, but Nino was leagues beyond the others. You change a couple cards here and there and boom, you got a new Nino deck. You may have guessed it, but in JP, Nino got hit. and Ichika, but it's essentially a Nino card at this point. On the December restriction list in JP, you get 2 copies of the 3-2 Nino and a choice of 3 as well. But in the English edition of Weiss Schwarz, we are also still getting the movie set, so we've got more Nino to look forward to. But over in the JP side, we could actually close the book on Quintessential Quintuplets because the movie did end the entire series, so, you know, they do have a game to grab new cards from, so... Mushoku Tensei. Oh wow, another skill-based deck. If you thought Nino was an auto-play deck, you haven't played Mushoku Tensei. Mushoku Tensei was a damn strong deck. There were multiple builds that you could make, and I was more inclined towards the gate choice combo, but my heart slid to the 8 bar. And of course, there was 8 standby. So earlier in the year, this was the top deck, and it was very similar to Nino, but it wasn't as prevalent. It feels that 8 standby Mushoku players immediately dropped the deck and moved on to the Nino build because I have not seen that many people play this deck except for the absolute unit that is Stock Swap Games, who got a runner-up in BCS Manhattan. Use your standby Eris to bring out your 2-2 Ghislanes, you close the game with your 3-2 Ghislanes, and for extra support you use the Paul. If you feel threatened, drop the rest counter on him. You are going to be fine on stock because you are calling all your high cost cards through your standbys. It is very simple to understand and it's very easy to pick up and play. When Mushoku Tensei came out, that was around the time that when Weiss Schwarz were starting to get like really well known in the scene and new players from different card games started coming into the scene. Because those players were dirty Yu-Gi-Oh players, they wanted the quote best deck in the format. At the time, the best deck was, well, you guessed it, 8 standby Mushoku Tensei. You could not go to a locals in the area without facing at least 3 MTI players. I'll be straight up, the deck just plays itself. You can take a person who has never played the game before, give them this deck, and they will be in the top cut. Why would I say that? Because it happened in my locals multiple times. You probably guessed it because you are living in the future, but both JP and English editions of this deck were hit. The lists were similar in both editions of the game. Now, with the end of the Mushoku Tensei light novel and another season in the horizon, I can expect this series to get another set. It is fairly popular and there was a huge meta viability, and I wouldn't be surprised if we get more. The second season Goblin Slayer is coming. Please give me another Goblin Slayer set. Now, we are going to talk about Hololive, but I want to preface this section by saying this. Hololive is nuts. There are a lot of cards and there is a lot of utility. There are also a lot of solid decks in Hololive and each one of them have their own weaknesses that players can play around. This set has been out in Japanese for a great while before it came out in English, but there were still many decks that were being worked on. My personal favorite was the Rushio level 3 from the trial deck, but the one that really rose to prominence was Kanata Marine. So for this segment, we're gonna talk about Hololive production. Sora standby. Alright, let me explain my choice super quick. When the Hololive cards were first being announced, I saw that the level 2 Sora can bring out the level 3 Sora, and that had Next Soul, and it was essentially like a pretty solid soul suppression deck. Then the level 1 got announced, and I was like, oh, would you look at that? It's a standby combo for Gen 0. So you reverse with the level 1, you salvage the level 3, and hope you trigger standby to bring out the level 2. Hopefully you could triple cancel, stay at your level 1. That way you could bring out your level 3 at level 1. You'll also pay 1 and bring more Soras from the deck to build a wall. This is a rogue at best strategy. There is quite a bit that can go wrong. Now, the reason that this deck is important is because it steamrolled D-Side in the WGP. It was a slow build-up, but it really took off at the end. And because of that, Sora was placed on the restriction list. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why is this deck important? Because the hit on the restriction list, that's why. This got hit on the restriction list, not Kanata Marine, not Rushia, not whatever you play in Aqua. This deck took the fall, and because it took the fall, it is another tournament season where Kanata Marine is free in JP. All because some dude did really well against his D-side matchups. And that's what brings me to kind of a side note. There needs to be a separate restriction list between the English editions of the game and the Japanese editions of the game. Now, restriction lists are different, but there needs to be a bigger divide now. Similar to how the Japanese edition of Yu-Gi-Oh!, the OCG and the TCG, those lists are essentially 2 completely different games now. Yes, they use the same cards, but the competitive scenes are completely different. I think the English edition of Weiss Schwarz needs to hit cards that are not relevant to JP. That's why I think Kanata Marine should have been on the restriction list for the English edition of the game. Also at locals, I personally think that the Japanese restriction list should take precedence over the English list in mixed tournaments. It isn't fair if a person can purchase their Nino deck in English and completely skip any sense of restriction. Now this is up to the local card shops, I get it, but still, it feels weird that you could just bypass an entire list by just buying your cards in English. It was like that with Kaguya-sama. I was going to talk about Tokyo Revengers dual laners, but essentially everyone already made a video on that, so I'm just going to briefly touch upon it. There are two different versions of this list. There's the English edition and the Japanese edition. Color me surprised, right? The Japanese edition uses empty doors. Essentially the 13th and the 14th anniversary Weiss Schwarz PR cards, and they also add some pachins. You started seeing some pachins floating around in some English deck lists as well. Now there are also pure pachin decks, which is just insane. This is definitely a damn good deck, and because I'm not talking about it here, it should not be taken that this is a lesser deck, like at all. In the English meta of Weiss Schwarz, this deck is prevalent. If you see Tokyo Revengers listed, it's probably this deck. Why get it from me when you could get it from the source? And that is where we're going to end today's video. Thank you all for watching. Did you play using this? And did you play against them? And how did you fare? In the Mushoku Tensei era, I used my Darkness deck because she got really big, and the wind triggers would actually force my opponent to hard play the Ghislaines to where they're just not going to have enough stock for the either do the Ghislaine combo or to use the rest counter. Big brain plays. Big brain plays. Thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more Weiss Schwarz news and content. Thank you all to my channel members scrolling up over here. They are all top 8 players in my eyes. And actually some of them are top 8 players. Thank you again. Catch you all in the next one.